Jack McCauley.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for your time. My name is Jack McCauley. I retired May 2013. I was the commander of the Maryland State Police Licensing Division. I spent 24 years of my life as a Maryland State Trooper. I spent a lot of time in criminal investigations. I've been assigned to the Eastern Shore for a long time, where I was a detective. Was one of the original 10 members of the Maryland State Police Homicide Unit, where I worked for quite a period of time. Successfully solved the first cold case homicide with the State Police. Ran that division. I worked my way up and was promoted. I ran the Maryland State Police Gang Unit across the entire state. I ran the Firearms Enforcement Unit. We were in charge, responsibility of supposed to be tracking down violent criminals involved in gun crime. Baltimore City, PG County, Gun Task Force with the ATF. In March of 2012, I was assigned to the Maryland State Police Licensing Division as the commander. I decided what good and substantial was. That was my job. I want to tell you, I haven't always felt the way I do right now. I was assigned there because the state of Maryland lost a lawsuit against good and substantial, where they said it didn't fit a good definition. It just wasn't reasonable. And so we were going to start issuing handgun permits. And I got to be honest with you, I was a little bit scared. Not so much afraid of people having handgun permits, but I was afraid of how would my people process that, a division who'd been ignored for so long with so few people. How would we do that? How many people would come out? And these crazy people, these Second Amendment activists, they're all going to want these. They're trophies. They're all going to want this permit. It's going to be scary. Dangerous people are going to be getting guns. Just any Joe citizen's going to get a gun. And so I started researching a little bit. I started meeting with some of these people from Maryland Shall Issue. What a crazy organization that is. I started meeting with AGC Gun Club. I was warned, don't talk to that guy. He's crazy. But you know what? When I met them, they schooled me. They not only schooled, they embarrassed me. They humbled me. I was wrong. I was completely wrong. I'd fought my life. I put my life on the line every day for the state of Maryland and the citizens of the state of Maryland. I worried about people carrying guns. I really did. I thought there would be blood in the street. So I devoted myself to studying that. And if you've been around me, you know that I'm pretty obsessive about everything that I do. So when I say I studied it, I mean I slept 2 hours a night studying it. I called everybody I could, every resource, talked to every person I could, and I found out some staggering information about handgun permits and what was going on. My fears weren't justified. MSI, they're a great organization with a lot of good people. I once fielded a complaint that I was a member of Maryland Shall Issue. Well, today I am a proud member of Maryland Shall Issue, but then I was not. I don't speak on their behalf today. I speak as a former representative of the licensing division and a former state trooper. But I want to tell you, there are over 11 million licensed handgun permit holders in the United States. A 10-year study was done from 1987 and on that studied over 2.5 million carriers. Of those, 168 people had their permit revoked for an offense involving a firearm. And more often than not, it was for accidentally carrying that firearm into a non-gun zone or a gun-free zone. Staggering. That's 0.006% of 2.5 million licensed firearm carriers over a 10-year period. What's more staggering than that is that the same study was done on law enforcement, and they were more likely than the handgun concealed weapon holders to be arrested for a crime involving a firearm. Slightly more, 0.007%. So I think about that, and I researched that. I looked at that. I wanted to read that study, and originally I wanted to prove it wrong. But I read that, and I tried to, and I couldn't. It was very accurate where they obtain their information. Law enforcement is more dangerous than concealed weapon carriers. The guys that I've met, the guys that I've been educated with, the guys that I've learned a lot from, AGC, the crazy guy, who is now one of the greatest guys I've ever met in my life. He knows these gun laws inside and out, and he knows the problems with it. He drew my attention as the commander of the licensing division to problems I didn't know existed. And I was well on my way to working out some of those issues, but I'm going to tell you, it's a bureaucratic nightmare. It really was. Because I didn't know, to be quite honest with you, some of the problems existed. But I just want to talk to you about good and substantial. When your permit application comes in, what is good and substantial? It's a reasonable precaution against an apprehended danger. Can anyone even define that? I literally would go downstairs because I had complaints day after day, over 300 emails a day that I would respond to. Many of them, as the commander of that division, were over the argument of what is good and substantial. Can you define, does this match? No. Does this match? No. Well, what does? So I would talk to my guys in that division, and we would argue. They would be arguing amongst themselves over applications. They're literally in the break room trying to decide whether someone met the definition of good and substantial. And sometimes they would lose the argument, or sometimes they would win the argument. It was the craziest thing I've ever seen, and I'm like, why don't you have a set policy for this? And I tried to set policy, but they couldn't, because they hung their hat on a court decision called Share. And Share decided that not only do you need a reasonable precaution against apprehended danger, it must be more than your personal anxiety. In other words, it must be more than what other people feel. Or you must have a danger more than other people. So I asked that same police officer, that trooper who was issuing the permits, he was deciding on it daily. I said, would you take your family to a baseball game in Baltimore City without your sidearm on? He said, absolutely not. I said, why not? He said, because you know why. I'm afraid. There's crime rate in Baltimore's high. I'm a police officer. I'm not going there. I said, but they don't know you're a police officer in Baltimore, do they? He said, no. You live in Baltimore? No. So your reasonable precaution against an apprehended danger is not because you're law enforcement, it's because you're in a high crime area and you wouldn't dare go in there without protecting your family. He said the legislators won't define it, so we have to. And that's just what they've done. The arbitrary administration of this process, it's horrible. It's an absolute nightmare, and it needs to have something done about it. Self-defense is very simple. As a senator, I'd be very concerned to go back and tell my constituents who are afraid of guns, who think gun violence is just destroying this, and say, I voted for a bill. I get that. I understand your fears. Trust me. Again, I once felt like that before I realized I was wrong. But what can you do? Well, I have reached out to so many lawmakers, and quite frankly, I've had very little response. I didn't just run the licensing division. I fought gang members across the state. I ran a gun unit. I know what violent crime is. I know the problem. I train police officers across the state. I train them. I know where their mistakes are. Do you know the average age of a police officer on the streets in Maryland? Or the average experience, rather? It's 18 months. Think about in 18 months what you knew. What you knew in 18 months. Not a lot. There's just some bad police work going on. And I am telling you, I can give you 10 top reasons how we can reduce gun crime in Maryland. I've reached out to the Moms Demand Action. They haven't responded to me.
Mr.
I've had a conversation. I've reached out with plenty of groups. Yes, sir.
If you could, you have some questions, and I've given you some extra time just because I know you're an expert on these issues. So, but if you could wrap up, and then I know you've got Senator Norman and Senator Reedy have questions for you.
Just to wrap up real quick.
Thank you so much.
What I believe in Maryland is that the way that we fight gun crime is out of focus completely. There are so many different scenarios and ideas and concepts for fighting gun crime. I'm willing to share them. I need someone to listen to those. We need a committee on that. But let me say this. These guys, who I once feared the same as you, carrying handgun permits isn't it. Statistics show that. They do. They're not a danger. They're vetted. The background check is done. They're required to qualify. This is not a danger or a threat to our society. I'll take any questions.
Thank you so much. Senator Norman, followed by Senator Reedy.
Mr. Chair. Mr. McCauley, thank you very much for being here today. How long were you with MSP?
I started at 24 years. 24 years.
Oh, you finished up at Pikesville?
Yes, I did.
With this unit? Is there anything systemic going on at MSP? They did not oppose this bill, which I thought was a little bit of a surprise. I thought they would oppose it. Have any thoughts on that? Why they're not opposing it? Is there anything going on down there? Maybe
I think that it swings. I think that it swings with political climate. I think when Governor O'Malley was governor, he would make it very clear that we're not going to be issuing permits as much as possible. In fact, I was told by his staff member that we want as few people in the state of Maryland to have handgun permits as possible, and that's the climate. That's the climate. So when a trooper works in that division or commands that division, he's a little bit paranoid about ending up a long distance from his house transferred because he's not following what the governor wants. Quite frankly, they work for the governor. So that's been a concern.
The brief that you sent me, which didn't have your phone number on it, but I have your brief. Do you mind if I copy it and share it with the other members
Please
of the
do.
committee?
You're welcome to.
I'll
Thank
do
you.
that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your excellent testimony. I'm just curious. I guess there's a lot of this is about the struggle between, MSP and how they define things, and how we wish that they would define them. Quite frankly, how I wish they'd define them. I mean, do you think part of the issue is that our officers? You talked about it a little bit. Are they afraid that if they approve a handgun permit, put aside the job issue, but if they approve one and then it turns out that that person ends up doing something, is that part of is that part of the fear that we need to try to work through on this?
I think that's 99% of it, because I think they're well intended. A trooper's taught from very early on is about liability. If you don't move the car off the side of the road when you should have and someone strikes it, you're going to be sued. If you don't take the drunk driver off the street who was borderline, maybe shouldn't be arrested, but maybe off the street, you're going to get sued if he wrecks and killed. If you give someone a handgun permit that causes damage somewhere else, you're going to get sued, and that's their fear.
And we want, of course, them to be careful about those kind of liability issues from a taxpayer perspective, but that is a battle. And then, secondly, you talk about administrative or paperwork hurdles. I mean, is what, this bill would be able to make it very clear as to what the standard is, correct?
It's what the state police have been begging for years. They've been asking you to define it. They've been asking you to define it. This is a simple definition.
I really liked the study that you point out. It would be very interesting, because I think there's a cultural issue that seems to happen with this debate where there are people who say, I think folks who live in a city or a large town may not understand. I live in the city of Westminster, so literally if I called 911, I would be a police officer very quickly. But in some places, we had some folks from Harford County and most parts of Carroll County that I represent, it would be a little while before someone would be there. It'd be 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and maybe longer sometimes. Probably, hopefully not, but could be 10, 15 minutes. So sometimes there's that, just like the person may be afraid of going into a certain part of Baltimore City, there are folks who are worried that if they're out in a rural area, and that's part of the issue. So thank you for your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a few quick ones. So do you think that first of all, thank you for coming. I mean, your testimony is really illuminating and much appreciated.
Thank you.
Do you think everyone should, outside of psychological issues and past felony convictions, that everybody should be entitled to a handgun who asks for one, a concealed carry permit?
You're asking my permit?
Yeah.
I don't think we should have concealed carry permits. I think it's a constitutional right. We shouldn't have a permit to have that right. I think that anyone should carry a handgun who's not otherwise prohibited by law, because I can tell you without a doubt the only people that's following this law are the law-abiding citizens.
Okay.
The criminals don't care. But having said that,
Right.
A good and substantial reason by self-defense, you still have to put a reason down. I think you can articulate that reason. State police can require that reason to be articulated. Look, I'm a retired police officer, and I don't have threats against me, but I automatically get a permit. I automatically get quite honestly, most senators in here probably have more people that hate them than hate me.
I would go along with that.
Yeah. So,
especially in the new part of my district, I would go along with that.
But I automatically qualify for that permit. You don't. You don't. So, there needs to be a fair process. I could tell you nightmare stories of who did qualify and who didn't. A 30-year Marine Corps veteran who just wanted a handgun permit. He said, look, you can put a restriction on it. My neighborhood's got a little bit scary. He's a retired lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps, 30 years. He said, I just want to walk my dog with my wife in my neighborhood. I'm a little bit scared. Nope, sorry, it's not good and substantial. But a bricklayer in Baltimore City who carried $200 cash in his pocket automatically got that permit.
So the second part of my question is this. I'm fine with all of these bills except for one, and let me tell you the one that gives me a little angst, and I just wanted to hear your response. The one that gives me the angst is the reciprocity issue, and for the reason that I have a lot of confidence in the people of Maryland and in the state police and them trying to do the jobs to the best of their ability, and hopefully this legislature clarifying that issue, because it needs to be clarified. I don't know what's going on in Virginia. I don't know what's going on in Pennsylvania. I don't know how they deliberate. They can change their rules anytime they want on guns and their regulation. And it's not my job or my interest to check out what they're doing or how they're doing it. And even if the governor goes and negotiates with them, administrations change, and sometimes the difference can be as stark as the difference between Governor O'Malley and Governor Hogan. I mean, different administrations bring in different rules and regulations. So that's my concern about reciprocity, and I just wanted to hear your comment.
So I speak honestly always, good, bad, or indifferent. Reciprocity scared me a little bit when I first saw that. It scared me. And the reason why it scared me was because some of the Maryland laws that are restrictive, in Maryland, if you're found to be delinquent as a juvenile for a crime of violence, you can't possess a firearm until the age of 30. Well, that's not in NICS, and so you could have a Pennsylvania permit and not necessarily know that and come into Maryland. However, with the amendment to that bill, I think that fixes that the governor can have an agreement with these other states that if you meet this requirement, you're okay. It's as simple a process as adding that language into some of those requirements for other states. In other words, Pennsylvania, if we have a reciprocity agreement, we agree with you that your permit's good in Maryland. If you meet these guidelines, we simply put those guidelines in. So after that amendment was given, I do support the bill. I didn't know that amendment was in.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For your testimony.